The old German Shepherd refused to leave the front wall of a rusted truck, and seconds later, Nathan realized the truck was hiding far more than a place to sleep. Nathan's hand flew to his knife as metal groaned somewhere inside the truck. Ranger stood frozen, ears locked forward, letting out a low whine he'd never made before. The wall looked solid, until Nathan noticed it was closer than it should have been. He reached toward a rusted bolt, and the silence suddenly felt far louder than the wind outside. "Before we begin, where are you watching from today?" The wind came down from the Bitterroot Mountains with the kind of bite that slipped through denim, leather, and bone alike. Nathan Brooks had learned long ago that cold wasn't the worst enemy. Silence was. Silence could disappear in an instant. One metallic slam, one burst of light, one sharp crack in the darkness. That was all it took. The old pickup rocked slightly as another gust swept across the abandoned logging road. Somewhere nearby, a loose sheet of corrugated metal banged against a forgotten fence. Clang. Nathan's eyes snapped open. His right hand shot beneath the worn blanket before his mind had time to catch up. His fingers wrapped around the folding knife tucked beside his sleeping bag, while his breathing stayed perfectly quiet. For one heartbeat, Montana vanished. The freezing mountains became another valley half a world away. Dust, rotors, radio static. Contact left. His muscles tightened. Then the sound came again. Clang. Not gunfire, not incoming rounds, just an old fence surrendering to another winter storm. Nathan slowly exhaled. The pickup's fogged windshield reminded him where he really was. Montana. Not Afghanistan. Not anymore. Beside him, Ranger lifted his head but didn't bark. The aging German Shepherd simply rested his chin on Nathan's knee, amber eyes watching him with quiet patience. "You knew before I did," Nathan murmured. One ear twitched. That was answer enough. Ranger had served 2 deployments before retirement. Like Nathan, he had learned that survival often depended on hearing danger before anyone else. Now both of them were veterans no one needed anymore. Nathan rubbed the dog's neck while staring at the last $10 bill folded inside his wallet. The edges had softened from being unfolded too many times. $10. That was everything. Enough for one decent meal. Enough for another night at a cheap roadside motel. Or enough for nothing at all. His stomach argued for breakfast. Experience argued for shelter. Shelter usually won. By mid-morning, the clouds had lowered until they scraped the mountain ridges. Nathan drove the pickup into the small Montana town of Elk Crossing, where weathered storefronts leaned against one another as if holding each other upright. The fuel gauge hovered just above empty. The engine rattled every time he stopped. He parked outside a salvage yard surrounded by rusted machinery, faded tractors, and vehicles whose stories had ended years earlier. A hand-painted sign read, "Brody Salvage Buoy, Sell, Scrap." The yard smelled of wet steel, pine sap, and old diesel fuel. An elderly woman wearing insulated coveralls stepped out of the office carrying a clipboard. "You buying?" she asked, "or just warming your hands?" Nathan offered a tired smile. "Depends what's cheap." She looked him over. Military haircut that had grown uneven. Boots repaired more than once. A jacket whose elbows had been patched by someone who understood how to make things last. Then she noticed Ranger climbing carefully from the truck. Pretty dog. He earned his gray. So did you. Nathan nodded without answering. The woman introduced herself as Evelyn Brody. Her late husband had owned the yard before cancer took him 3 winters earlier. Business wasn't what it used to be. Neither was anything else. Nathan wandered through rows of forgotten vehicles. Old ranch trucks, snowplows, camp trailers, broken dreams with license plates. Then he saw it. A faded white box truck sitting alone near the back fence. Rust covered the lower panels. The tires had collapsed into the gravel. Moss climbed one corner like it had been claiming ownership for years. Something about it felt different, not valuable, just abandoned in a way Nathan understood. He walked around it slowly, unconsciously clearing corners the same way he'd once searched compounds overseas. Old habits, never completely gone. It runs? Evelyn laughed softly. Not a chance. Engine? Locked up. Transmission? Probably. So why keep it? She looked toward the truck for a long moment. It belonged to a man named Walter Hayes. Nathan waited. She never continued. Instead, she sighed. County says it's got to go tomorrow. Been sitting here nearly 2 years. Family? No one came. Nathan rested a hand against the cold steel. The cargo box still felt solid. Dry shelter. 4 walls. A roof. That was enough. How much? Evelyn looked at him as though she'd misheard. For that? Nathan nodded. She studied him carefully, then glanced toward Ranger. The old shepherd stood quietly beside the truck instead of sniffing around the yard, almost like he had already chosen it. You got $10? Nathan slowly removed the last bill from his wallet. That's everything. She looked at the money, then at him, then back at the truck. I ought to tell you no. But Walter would have hated seeing it crushed. She accepted the bill almost reluctantly. I'll write you a salvage title. Nathan signed the paper. His signature looked steadier than his life felt. Evelyn dug through a drawer before producing an old brass key attached to faded leather. As she placed it into Nathan's palm, her voice lowered. Whatever else people tell you. She hesitated. Walter Hayes was one of the good ones. Nathan climbed into the cargo box just before sunset. The inside surprised him. Dry. No leaks. No mold. The wooden floor still held firm beneath his boots. He spread his sleeping bag against one wall. Ranger circled twice before lying nearby. Outside, snow began drifting across the salvage yard. For the first time in months, Nathan wasn't sleeping beneath open sky. He closed the rear door until only a thin ribbon of fading daylight slipped underneath. The quiet felt almost unreal. He was nearly asleep when Ranger stood. The shepherd walked toward the front wall of the cargo box. Stopped. Ears forward. Body perfectly still. Nathan watched without moving. Ranger lowered his nose against the steel. A soft whine escaped his throat. Not fear. Not pain. Recognition. He pawed once. Then again. Then remained frozen, staring at the wall as if someone were standing just beyond it. Nathan slowly sat upright. The military instinct that had kept him alive overseas stirred again. Something wasn't right. He rose quietly, every sense awake. The wall suddenly seemed closer than it should have been. Nathan remained perfectly still. In Afghanistan, the men who survived were rarely the fastest. They were the ones who stopped moving long enough to notice what everyone else missed. His breathing slowed. Ranger hadn't taken his eyes off the wall. The old German shepherd gave another soft whine, lower this time, then tapped the wooden floor twice with one paw. Not excitement. An alert. Nathan slipped his flashlight from his backpack and clicked it on. A narrow beam swept across the front wall of the cargo box. Nothing. Just weathered plywood stained by decades of use. Still, something bothered him. He turned slowly, studying every corner the way he'd once searched abandoned compounds outside Kandahar. Every surface told a story if you looked long enough. His flashlight reached the ceiling. Steel ribs, old insulation, rust stains, then back down. The floor. Nathan crouched and measured the truck using nothing more than his stride. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 long paces. He stopped. Outside, the cargo box had looked almost 20 feet long. Inside, barely 14. His pulse slowed instead of quickening. That always happened when something dangerous, or important, revealed itself. "You're right," he whispered to Ranger. The dog walked closer, pressing his nose against one vertical seam in the wood. Nathan knelt beside him. The plywood looked original. The screws were aged. Even the paint matched. Whoever built this knew exactly how to hide it. His fingertips explored the boards inch by inch. Years repairing military vehicles had taught him something valuable. Machines lied. Hands didn't. Then he felt it. Cold steel. Not a nail. A bolt. It sat nearly flush with the wood, disguised beneath layers of old varnish and dust. He wrapped 2 fingers around it. Instead of resisting, it turned, smoothly, as though someone had lubricated it before sealing the wall forever. Nathan frowned. "No way." A quiet metallic click echoed somewhere inside the wall. Ranger stepped back immediately. Nathan did the same. Neither moved. Nothing happened. Only the wind pushing against the truck outside. He waited another full minute before approaching again. The beam of his flashlight traced a nearly invisible line running from floor to ceiling. A door, hidden so perfectly that most people would have leaned against it without ever knowing. Nathan slid his fingers into the narrow seam. The panel resisted at first. Then, with a tired sigh that sounded almost human, it swung inward. Warm air drifted out. Nathan blinked. Warm. Impossible. There hadn't been a fire inside this truck for years, yet the air beyond the doorway felt noticeably different, held inside by thick insulation that had refused to surrender to Montana's winter. He lifted the flashlight higher. The beam disappeared into another room. Not a compartment. Not a crawl space. A room. Someone had built it with extraordinary care. Tongue and groove pine covered every wall. The wood had darkened into a rich amber after decades of age. A narrow military-style cot stood against one side beneath folded wool blankets. Across from it hung a workbench that folded neatly against the wall. Above the bench, hand tools rested inside painted outlines exactly where they belonged. Every hammer, every chisel, every plane. Clean, oiled, waiting. Nathan stepped inside carefully. The floor barely creaked. His boot brushed a braided rug faded by time but still intact. He swept the flashlight across shelves filled with rolled maps, weatherproof document tubes, leather-bound journals, and dozens of carefully labeled metal file boxes. Nothing about this looked accidental. Everything had purpose. Everything had order. It reminded him of a forward operations planning room, only quieter, more personal. Ranger entered behind him without hesitation. Instead of exploring, the old shepherd simply sat beside the cot, as though he'd already inspected the place. Nathan noticed something else. The room smelled faintly of cedar, not mold, not decay. Someone had lined the walls with cedar behind the pine boards. Insulation, moisture protection, a craftsman's work. Walter Hayes hadn't thrown this together. He had built it to last. Nathan's flashlight reached the far wall. Then he stopped breathing for a moment. Maps. Hundreds of them. Pinned in careful rows. Topographic surveys. Federal land grids. Mining claims. Old geological overlays. Some were marked in red pencil. Others connected by handwritten notes. Several carried military-style coordinate references Nathan immediately recognized. LZ, OP, grid references, observation points. Whoever made these maps thought like a soldier. Beneath them stood locked steel file cabinets bolted directly into the floor. Beside them rested 3 weathered journals stacked with almost ceremonial precision. On top lay a folded pair of reading glasses, as though Walter had simply stepped outside for a moment. Nathan picked up the first journal. The leather cover had cracked with age. Embossed into the front were only 2 words: Field Notes. He opened the first page. The handwriting was square, disciplined, unmistakably military. January 14th. Snow came early. Reached Survey Point Echo before daylight. The company men arrived again. They still don't know I've been documenting everything. If they ever do, none of this survives without someone willing to finish it. Nathan slowly turned another page, then another. The entries stretched across decades. Coordinates, names, mine numbers, property deeds, federal correspondence, photographs clipped into the margins. It wasn't treasure. It was evidence. Decades of it. Behind him, Ranger suddenly lifted his head. His ears rotated toward the cargo bay outside. Nathan heard it a second later. A faint crunch. Snow. Someone had just stepped into the salvage yard. Nathan closed the journal without making a sound. Years of training returned before conscious thought ever had the chance. Flashlight off, breathing slow, listen first, move second. Ranger had already risen from the floor, every muscle tightening beneath his graying coat. The old German shepherd wasn't barking. He rarely did unless there was no other choice. His eyes stayed fixed on the narrow opening leading back into the cargo bay. Crunch. Another careful step outside. Not wandering. Deliberate. Nathan reached the hidden door and eased it almost shut, leaving only a narrow crack. Through it, he slipped into the cargo box, crouching low behind a stack of old wooden crates left against one wall. The moon filtered beneath the roll-up door in a thin silver line. A shadow crossed it. Someone stopped outside. Nathan counted silently. 1, 2, 3. No attempt to force the door, just silence. Then came the faint scrape of gloved fingers brushing rusted steel. Whoever it was knew enough not to make unnecessary noise. Ranger stood beside Nathan, his ears angled toward the rear door. The dog glanced once at Nathan, waiting. Easy. Nathan whispered so softly the word barely existed. Another minute passed. The footsteps retreated. Snow crunched farther away. An engine started somewhere beyond the salvage yard. Not close. Not rushed. Just gone. Nathan waited 5 full minutes before opening the cargo door. The winter air rushed inside. Fresh snow covered the yard, smooth except for a single trail of boot prints leading from the fence to the truck, and back again. He followed them only far enough to confirm what instinct already knew. One visitor. Heavy work boots, measured stride, no hesitation. Not a curious teenager, not a thief looking for tools. Someone had come to inspect this truck. Nothing else. Nathan slowly scanned the tree line beyond the fence. Old habits refused to die. Every shadow became possible concealment. Every patch of darkness suggested an observation point. Nothing moved. Only the wind combing through frozen pines. He lowered his shoulders. Let's go back. Ranger followed without taking his eyes off the woods. Inside the hidden room, Nathan lit an old oil lantern resting beside the workbench. To his surprise, fresh fuel waited inside its reservoir. Walter Hayes had prepared everything with astonishing care. The soft amber light transformed the room. It no longer felt hidden. It felt lived in. Nathan returned to the first journal. The opening pages contained no stories, only observations, dates, coordinates, weather, vehicle descriptions, license plate numbers, mining claim references. Every page written with the discipline of a soldier filing intelligence reports. Hours slipped by unnoticed. Near midnight, the entries began changing. Not dramatically, just personally. October 9th. Met another young veteran outside Butte. Marine. Wouldn't tell me his name. Hands shook every time a truck backfired. Shared coffee. Didn't ask questions. Sometimes silence is warmer than advice. Nathan stopped reading. His thumb rested against the edge of the page. He knew those hands. He had worn them himself. Another entry. December 18th. Snowstorm. Found a family stranded on Forest Road 218. Engine frozen. Stayed until help arrived. Nobody remembered my name. That's all right. The mountain did. Walter rarely wrote about himself. He wrote about people. People he helped. People he watched disappear. People nobody else seemed to notice. Nathan continued. Then another page caught his attention. The handwriting changed. Less steady. March 14th. Daniel would have turned 33 today. Still catch myself looking at young men with his walk. Funny how hope survives longer than reason. Nathan stared at the sentence. Daniel. The name appeared again 2 pages later. Then again, always briefly. Never explained. Only remembered. Ranger quietly rested beside the cot. Nathan absent-mindedly scratched behind the dog's ears while reading on. Finally, nearly halfway through the journal, Walter wrote more than a few lines. My son believed I loved work more than people. I spent years proving him right. By the time I learned otherwise, he had already disappeared beyond every road I knew how to drive. Nathan leaned back. The lantern flickered gently. Outside, snow whispered against the truck's roof. He remembered another winter. Another night. Another convoy outside Bagram. One young soldier laughing because somebody had mailed him homemade cookies. 3 hours later, that same Humvee struck an IED. Nathan still remembered carrying the folded flag. The memory arrived without warning. The smell of diesel, the taste of dust, the impossible silence afterward. His breathing shortened. Ranger immediately lifted his head and pressed against Nathan's leg. Solid, warm, present. Nathan closed his eyes. The truck, the lantern, the cedar walls. Montana. Not Afghanistan. The flashback loosened its grip. He opened the journal again. The final line on the page seemed written directly for him. Grief doesn't leave. It just learns quieter ways to sit beside you. Nathan swallowed slowly. For the first time in months, he didn't feel completely alone. Somewhere, years before either of them had ever met, another veteran had walked the same lonely road. Only Walter hadn't surrendered to it. He had built something, hidden it, protected it, and left it waiting. Nathan reached for the second journal. As he lifted it, something folded inside slipped free. A yellowed survey map. Across the center stretched dozens of hand-drawn circles surrounding one isolated mountain basin. In thick black pencil, Walter had written only one sentence. The truth isn't buried. It's being guarded. Nathan looked at Ranger. The old shepherd was no longer staring at the journals. He was staring at the steel file cabinets bolted against the far wall, as though whatever mattered most still hadn't been opened. Nathan carried the lantern toward the steel cabinets. Each one was bolted through the pine floor into the truck's frame itself. Walter Hayes hadn't been worried about thieves. He had been worried about time. The cabinet doors bore no manufacturer labels, only neatly stamped numbers. 1, 2, 3. The locks weren't sophisticated. Nathan recognized them immediately. Old military surplus cam locks, the kind he'd seen securing equipment chests years earlier. Durable, reliable, easy to maintain. He searched the workbench. Every drawer opened with quiet precision. Sandpaper, sharpening stones, drafting pencils, survey tools, nothing out of place. Inside the last drawer lay a small brass ring holding 3 keys. A faded tag tied to it carried only one handwritten word. When. Nathan turned the tag over. Nothing on the back. He looked toward Ranger. The old shepherd watched silently, tail resting on the rug, as though he had already decided the room had waited long enough. Nathan inserted the first key into cabinet 1. The lock clicked. Inside were thick binders wrapped in waxed canvas. He lifted one onto the table. Federal mining claims, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, Nevada. Every folder contained original deeds, survey certifications, notarized affidavits, satellite photographs, and geological reports. Not copies. Originals. He opened another. Rare earth mineral assessment. Estimated recoverable value. The number printed across the final page made him stop reading. $308 million. Nathan stared at it for several long seconds. Not cash, not gold, not hidden diamonds. Land, mineral rights, ownership. Legal documentation stretching back decades. He slowly closed the folder. Walter hadn't hidden a fortune. He had hidden proof. Cabinet 2 held something even stranger. Photographs. Hundreds of them. Mountain ridges. Survey stakes. Government markers. Mining equipment. License plates. Executives shaking hands. Helicopters landing on remote clearings. Each photograph carried dates, locations, and handwritten observations. Walter had documented everything. Patiently. Methodically. Like an intelligence officer building a case no court could ignore. Nathan's fingers paused over one photograph. A younger Walter stood beside a ridge wearing worn denim and an old army field jacket. His face was lined, but his eyes remained steady. Behind him rose the very mountain basin marked on the folded map Nathan had found earlier. Across the bottom, Walter had written, "They think they're stealing dirt. They're stealing the future." Nathan opened cabinet 3. Unlike the others, this one contained only a single waterproof document case. He unlatched it. Inside rested one leather portfolio. Its cover read, "Property Transfer Package." He opened it carefully. The first pages confirmed ownership transfers, mining claims, federal leases, trust agreements. Every signature appeared genuine. Everything had been legally assembled. Then, a red divider stopped the sequence. Final validation file. Missing. Nathan frowned. Every page after that referenced supporting documents that weren't there. Without the missing validation file, none of the ownership records could actually be enforced. The entire case stood on one absent piece of evidence. Walter had hidden nearly everything, but not the last piece. Nathan leaned back in the chair. "So where did you put it?" The lantern hissed softly. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside, Ranger suddenly stood. His ears pointed toward the cargo bay. Nathan looked up immediately. No sound. Not yet. Only Ranger's posture. The dog walked through the hidden doorway before stopping just inside the larger cargo box. His nose lifted into the air. Nathan quietly extinguished the lantern. Darkness swallowed the room. His pupils adjusted almost instantly. Another habit from years of night operations. He eased the hidden panel nearly closed. The cargo bay lay in pale moonlight, filtering beneath the rear door. Nothing moved. Then, a faint scrape. Metal against metal. Someone was testing the lock. Nathan's breathing slowed. He silently checked his escape routes. Rear door. Driver's cab. Hidden room. No good options. Ranger's body stiffened. The shepherd gave one deep rumble from his chest. Not loud. Just enough. The scraping stopped. A flashlight beam briefly swept beneath the rear door, slicing through the darkness. Nathan saw boots. Polished. Expensive. Not work boots. The visitor remained outside for nearly 30 seconds. No words. No knocking. Only watching. Then the beam disappeared. Footsteps retreated across fresh snow. Moments later, a vehicle engine started beyond the salvage yard. Nathan waited another full minute before opening the cargo door. Fresh tire tracks cut across the untouched snow leading toward the county highway. He crouched beside them. Heavy SUV, all-terrain tires, nearly new. Someone with money. Someone who knew exactly which truck to visit. Ranger sniffed the tracks once before looking toward the highway, a low growl lingering in his throat. Nathan rested one hand on the dog's shoulder. "They're not looking for the truck," he said quietly. "They're looking for what's inside." Morning arrived beneath a pale gray sky. Nathan locked the hidden room exactly as he'd found it and crossed the yard toward Evelyn Brody's office. She looked up from an old coffee pot as he entered. "You sleep all right?" He hesitated, then asked instead, "Who besides you knew Walter Hayes?" Her expression changed almost imperceptibly. "Not many. Anyone ever come asking about his truck?" She stopped pouring coffee. "Twice." "When?" "After Walter died." Nathan waited. They weren't family. Who were they? Evelyn looked out the frosted window toward the truck. "They said they represented a mining company." She folded her arms. "I told them exactly what I knew." "And what was that?" "That Walter spent 30 years making powerful people nervous." She met Nathan's eyes. "And yesterday," her voice grew quieter, "I saw that same black SUV parked across the road." Nathan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Somewhere beyond the mountains, someone already knew the truck had finally found a new owner. Nathan spent the next hour making the hidden room disappear again. Every journal returned to the exact position where Walter Hayes had left it. The lantern went back onto its hook. The maps were rolled and tied with faded leather straps. Even the chair beneath the workbench faced the same direction. Years in special forces had taught him a simple truth. If someone searched a place, the smallest thing out of place could tell them another person had already been there. Ranger watched without moving. Only when Nathan secured the hidden panel did the old shepherd finally relax enough to lie down. "You don't trust this place either." The dog's tail tapped the wooden floor once. Outside, the morning sky hung low over Elk Crossing, squeezing pale sunlight through heavy clouds. Nathan borrowed a floor jack from Evelyn Brody and spent the afternoon replacing one ruined tire with an old spare she found buried behind the shop. The truck still couldn't run, but it no longer leaned awkwardly into the frozen gravel. Working with his hands quieted his mind. A rusted bolt, a seized hinge, grease beneath his fingernails. Those things made sense. People rarely did. Around noon, a black SUV rolled slowly through the front gate. New paint, dark windows, no license plate frame advertising a local dealership. Nathan noticed it before the engine stopped. His shoulders never changed position, but his eyes tracked every reflection in the side mirror of the truck. Driver, front passenger. Only two. The passenger stepped out first. He wore polished boots untouched by mud and a charcoal overcoat that cost more than Nathan's pickup had ever been worth. Late 40s, silver hair, leather briefcase. He smiled before speaking. It never reached his eyes. "You must be Mr. Brooks." Nathan kept tightening the wheel lug with deliberate calm. "Depends who's asking." The man extended a business card. "Grant Holloway." Nathan accepted it. "Attorney at law. Black Ridge Minerals." The name meant nothing. Yet. I represent clients with an interest in this vehicle. Nathan looked toward the box truck. It's not for sale. Grant smiled again. I haven't made an offer. You drove a long way. I did. And somehow knew who bought a truck yesterday. Grant ignored the observation. My clients appreciate history. Walter Hayes owned that truck for many years. Nathan remained silent. We're prepared to offer $50,000. Nathan actually laughed. The sound surprised even him. You haven't even asked if it runs. It doesn't matter. Apparently not. Grant slipped both hands into his coat pockets. Mr. Brooks, everyone has a number. Nathan looked at Ranger. The old shepherd hadn't barked, hadn't growled. He simply stared at Grant with complete attention. Military working dogs were trained to read intent long before words. Ranger didn't like this man. Neither did Nathan. I already told you. He handed the business card back. It's not for sale. Grant didn't take it. Instead, he looked past Nathan toward the truck. You haven't had much luck lately, have you? Nathan's expression never changed. I read local newspapers. Grant continued casually. Decorated veteran. Security contractor. Company folded. Home foreclosed. He tilted his head slightly. Life can turn quickly. Nathan folded the card once and slipped it into his pocket. Anything else? Grant's smile disappeared. If you happen to discover documents belonging to Walter Hayes, they should legally be returned. Nathan felt something settle into place inside his mind. There it was, not a guess anymore. Confirmation. They knew about the documents, just not where they were. I've never met Walter Hayes. Grant nodded slowly. I imagine you'll hear from me again. The SUV backed onto the county road and disappeared beneath the falling snow. Nathan watched until it became only another dark shape among the pines. Evelyn stepped out of the office carrying 2 mugs of coffee. I don't like lawyers who smile that much. Nathan accepted one. You know Black Ridge? She stared toward the empty road. Everybody around here knows the name. She lowered her voice. They buy land cheap. They buy politicians expensive. She looked at Nathan. Walter used to argue with them every chance he got. What about? He never said. She hesitated. But once he told my husband, her eyes drifted toward the mountains, that some people dig holes for profit. Others dig them to bury the truth. Nathan didn't answer. That night the temperature dropped below 0. He parked the pickup beside the box truck and chose to sleep inside the hidden room instead. The cedar walls held warmth surprisingly well. He lit the tiny oil lantern, read another dozen pages from Walter's journal, then finally stretched out on the cot. Ranger settled on the rug beside him. Silence returned. For nearly 2 hours. Then, a sudden burst of white light exploded through the narrow crack beneath the cargo door. Headlights. Nathan's eyes flew open. Before he knew where he was, his body had already reacted. He rolled off the cot, dropped low, reached for a weapon that wasn't there. Contact left! The words escaped before thought. His pulse hammered. His breathing shortened. For one terrible instant, he smelled burning diesel instead of cedar. Rotor blades. Radio chatter. Someone screaming for a medic. Ranger was already beside him. The shepherd pressed his body firmly against Nathan's shoulder. Solid, heavy, present. Nathan squeezed his eyes shut. The lantern. The hidden room. Montana. Not Helmand Province, not anymore. Outside, a vehicle idled for only a few seconds, then drove away. Nathan remained sitting on the floor long after the engine disappeared. Ranger rested his head across Nathan's knee without making a sound. Neither of them slept again before dawn. When daylight finally crept through the hidden room, Nathan opened Walter's journal almost absent-mindedly. A folded sheet of paper slipped from between the pages. Unlike the others, it wasn't handwritten. It was typed. Across the top appeared a single line. Confidential. Federal witness contact. Below it was one name. Special Agent Rebecca Sloan, FBI. And beneath that, a handwritten note from Walter. If anything happens to me, she gets everything. Unless they find me first. Nathan read the sentence twice, then a third time. Walter Hayes had never wasted words. Every page of his journals proved that. If he had written those 2 lines by hand, it meant he believed someone would eventually come looking. Not just for him, but for everything he had spent decades collecting. Nathan folded the paper and slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket. He didn't trust leaving it anywhere. Not anymore. Ranger watched him from the doorway of the hidden room, ears relaxed but eyes alert. The old shepherd had sensed the change long before Nathan admitted it to himself. The truck was no longer shelter. It was evidence. Outside, fresh snow had erased yesterday's tire tracks. Nathan stood beside the cargo truck, with a mug of black coffee warming his hands. His eyes drifted automatically across the salvage yard, tracing likely approaches, fence gaps, elevated ground, and the ridgeline overlooking the property. Observation first, movement second. He hadn't done that consciously in years. PTSD wasn't always panic. Sometimes it looked like a man who couldn't stop planning exits. Evelyn stepped outside carrying a paper sack. I figured soldiers don't eat enough. Nathan accepted it. Inside were 2 biscuits wrapped in wax paper. I'll pay you back. You already did. He frowned. You fixed my old air compressor yesterday. Nathan had almost forgotten. It had taken him less than 20 minutes. She smiled faintly. Walter used to fix things instead of accepting thanks. Nathan looked toward the mountains. I'm beginning to think I bought more than a truck. You did. Evelyn hesitated. He trusted almost nobody. She looked directly at him. If he left all that to you... Her sentence faded unfinished. Nathan knew why. Neither of them understood why. By noon, he had made his decision. He spread Walter's topographic maps across the fold-down workbench. Most looked ordinary, until he compared them. Walter hadn't marked roads. He had marked observation points, high ridges, drainages, rock outcroppings, natural concealment, exactly the kind of terrain a reconnaissance team would choose. Nathan smiled despite himself. You old engineer. He traced several handwritten symbols. Not mining symbols. Military shorthand. OP.LZ.RV. Walter had borrowed battlefield language to hide civilian locations. One symbol repeated again and again, a small triangle inside a circle. Beside it, Grid 47-B. Nathan unfolded the larger survey map. The coordinates matched a remote basin deep inside the Absaroka Mountains, nearly 60 miles southeast. Far from highways, far from towns, far from anyone asking questions. Ranger suddenly lifted his head. Not toward the truck, toward Nathan's backpack. The dog nudged one side pocket repeatedly. Nathan unzipped it. Inside lay his old military GPS, dead battery. He laughed quietly. You've got a better memory than I do. An hour later, the device powered on using fresh batteries from Evelyn's workshop. The coordinates loaded immediately. Walter's markings led toward a forgotten Forest Service road, abandoned years earlier. Nathan folded the maps. We're taking a drive. The pickup complained every mile climbing into the mountains. Snow lined both shoulders. Towering lodgepole pines swallowed the narrow road until daylight barely reached the windshield. Nathan drove slowly. Not because of ice, because he hated blind corners. Every bend reminded him of convoy routes through Afghanistan, where one hidden threat could change everything. Ranger sat upright between the seats. No sleeping. No panting. Working. Nathan noticed something unusual. Whenever they approached a narrow canyon or dense stand of timber, Ranger's ears shifted before the truck entered it, reading the terrain, just like before. Military dogs never completely retired. Late afternoon found them parked beside a washed-out logging trail. The GPS showed another mile on foot. Nathan shouldered his pack. He automatically checked water, compass, knife, medical kit, flashlight. His movements flowed from habit older than memory. The mountain air carried only wind and distant ravens. Beautiful. Quiet. Too quiet. Halfway up the trail, Ranger stopped. Not froze. Stopped. His nose stayed low to the snow. Nathan immediately stepped off the main path. What is it? The shepherd sniffed again before circling a patch of powder. Nathan crouched. Almost invisible beneath fresh snowfall stretched a length of thin steel cable. Tripwire. Modern. Not old fencing. Recently installed. His heartbeat slowed. Someone had prepared this trail. He followed the cable with his eyes. 20 feet uphill. It disappeared behind a dead pine. Nathan moved carefully through the trees instead of following the obvious route. Behind the pine sat 3 heavy rocks balanced against wooden wedges. One pull. Gravity would do the rest. A simple deadfall. Enough to crush anyone walking below. Nathan studied it silently. No weathering. Fresh tool marks. This trap hadn't been here long. Ranger looked back at him. The dog hadn't simply found danger. He had saved Nathan from walking directly beneath it. Nathan scratched the shepherd gently behind one ear. You just earned dinner. They continued another 100 yards before Nathan found something else. Fresh tire impressions beneath the snow. TV tires, less than 2 days old. Someone else had reached these mountains recently. Someone searching the same coordinates. The sun slipped lower behind the ridges. Long blue shadows stretched across the valley. Nathan looked toward the basin marked on Walter's map. It lay just beyond the next rise. Then Ranger growled. A deep, unmistakable warning. Nathan dropped instinctively behind a fallen log. Seconds later, a rifle shot cracked across the mountains. Wood exploded from the tree exactly where Nathan had been standing. Ranger lunged toward him and yelped. A sharp fragment of shattered wood sliced deep into the shepherd's shoulder as he pushed Nathan clear of the second shot. The old dog staggered, but planted himself between Nathan and the unseen shooter anyway. Ranger! Nathan grabbed the shepherd's harness and pulled both of them behind the fallen pine just as another shot tore through the branches above their heads. Bark exploded into splinters. The rifle report echoed across the basin before dissolving into the wind. Nathan forced himself to breathe. Not panic. Assess. The shooter had elevation, roughly 200 yards. West Ridge. The delay between muzzle blast and impact gave him enough. He resisted the urge to look over the log. That mistake had cost good men their lives. Instead, he slid his compact mirror from his field repair kit, extended it just above the bark for half a second, then dropped it again. Only a flash. Enough. One figure. Dark jacket. Camouflage netting draped over a cluster of rocks. Not a hunter. A prepared position. Nathan looked down. Blood stained Ranger's left shoulder, but the wound wasn't pouring. A jagged piece of wood had sliced deep beneath the fur. The old shepherd's breathing was fast, yet his eyes never left the ridgeline. "You stay with me," Nathan whispered. Ranger answered with the faintest wag of his tail. Nathan opened his medical pouch. Pressure dressing, antiseptic. He worked quickly, hands steady despite the rifle rounds. The moment he tightened the bandage, Ranger leaned into him instead of pulling away. "Good boy." Another shot cracked. Lower this time. The shooter wasn't trying to warn them anymore. He was adjusting. Nathan studied the terrain. Walter's map surfaced in his memory. Observation point. LZ, fallback route. The old engineer hadn't only documented mines, he had documented escape paths. Nathan reached into his jacket and unfolded the copied section of Walter's map. A pencil mark caught his eye. Dry Creek. Seasonal wash. Covered approach. He smiled despite the situation. You left breadcrumbs. Keeping low, Nathan guided Ranger into a narrow drainage hidden beneath snow-covered brush. Within 20 yards, they vanished from the shooter's line of sight. The rifle fell silent. Either the gunman thought they'd been hit, or he'd begun moving. Nathan preferred neither option. The creek bed twisted through granite boulders before opening into a small meadow surrounded by ancient lodgepole pines. The GPS vibrated softly. Destination: 180 yards. The final climb was steep. Nathan moved slowly, checking every shadow, every fallen log, every patch of disturbed snow. Fresh boot prints. 2 people. No. 3. Less than 24 hours old. They had searched this place already, yet they hadn't found what Walter hid. Otherwise, they wouldn't still be hunting him. The GPS finally stopped blinking. Coordinates reached. Nathan looked around. Nothing. Only rock. Wind. Snow. Ranger limped past him. The shepherd ignored the GPS entirely. Instead, he sniffed the ground beside an enormous granite outcrop split by lightning decades earlier. He pawed once. Nathan walked over. Nothing obvious. Then he noticed something almost invisible beneath frozen moss. A rusted survey marker. Government issue. Stamped with faded numbers. Walter's journals. Survey points. Nathan brushed away snow. The marker wasn't anchored to bedrock. It sat inside a steel sleeve. He gripped it. Twisted. It lifted free. Beneath it waited a narrow brass tube sealed with wax. Nathan stared for a moment. "So that's where you hid it." Inside the tube rested one rolled document wrapped in oilcloth. He carefully opened it. The missing validation file. Original federal certification. Official survey seals. Environmental approvals. Every signature needed to complete Walter's legal ownership claim. Without this, the entire case collapsed. With it, everything inside the hidden truck became legally undeniable. Nathan tucked the documents inside a waterproof pouch, then noticed something else inside the brass tube. A smaller, folded note. Walter's handwriting. "If you found this, you already know someone followed me. Don't go back the same way. They're watching the obvious roads." Nathan almost laughed. "You stubborn old soldier." Walter had anticipated pursuit years before it happened. Ranger suddenly growled. Not loudly. Urgently. Nathan turned. Movement. Across the meadow. 3 figures. About 400 yards away. Binoculars flashed in the afternoon sun. They had spotted him. One pointed. The others immediately spread apart instead of charging together. Professional. Trying to cut off escape routes. Nathan's Green Beret instincts returned effortlessly. "They're flanking. He counted. Left, center, right. They wanted to funnel him toward the open slope, exactly where the riflemen still held the high ground. Nathan folded Walter's map. There'll be no firefight today. He clipped Ranger's leash onto the harness. The old shepherd shifted his weight, despite the injured shoulder. You've still got one good side. Ranger looked up. Ready. Nathan scanned the terrain one final time. Steep ravine to the east. Dense timber beyond it. Difficult footing. Impossible for vehicles. Perfect. He tossed an empty water bottle into the brush 30 yards north. One of the men instantly turned toward the noise. Still human. Still predictable. Nathan slipped into the ravine with Ranger close behind. Snow muffled every step. Within seconds, the forest swallowed them whole. Behind them came shouted voices. Then another rifle shot, this one missed by nearly 50 yards. Nathan didn't look back. Walter's final instruction echoed in his mind. Don't go back the same way. For the first time since buying the truck, Nathan understood the full weight of what he carried. It wasn't $300 million. It was the one piece of truth powerful enough to make armed men chase a homeless veteran across an entire mountain range. Nathan kept moving. He never ran. Running burned energy and narrowed judgment. His instructors had drilled that lesson into him years before, and the mountains rewarded patience more than speed. Behind him, distant voices drifted through the pines. They weren't shouting anymore. That worried him more. Professionals stopped talking once the hunt began. Ranger limped beside him, favoring his left shoulder, but refusing to slow. Blood had seeped through the bandage, leaving dark spots across the snow. Every few minutes, Nathan knelt, checked the dressing with practiced hands, and quietly told the old shepherd he was doing fine. Ranger answered each time by standing before Nathan could finish. The ravine narrowed into a frozen creek. Walter's map fleshed through Nathan's memory again. Creeks erased footprints. Nathan stepped into the icy water without hesitation. The cold punched through his boots, but within 20 yards the current carried away every trace of where they had entered. Ranger followed, teeth clenched against the freezing water. Easy, partner. The shepherd never looked away from the tree line. Nathan studied the terrain ahead. A fallen spruce bridged the creek 50 yards downstream. Too obvious. Instead, he climbed the opposite bank where thick brush concealed their movement. His breathing remained steady. Years ago, outside a village in eastern Afghanistan, his team had escaped a larger force by refusing the easiest path. The mountains hadn't changed. Human nature hadn't either. Half an hour later, they reached a rocky overlook. Nathan stopped instantly. Fresh cigarette smoke. Barely noticeable. Someone had stood there within minutes. He crouched and found a boot print pressed into damp soil beneath an overhanging rock. Size 11. Deep heel. Heavy man. Watching the valley below. They leapfrogged us, Nathan murmured. Ranger's ears snapped toward the ridgeline. The shepherd gave one sharp bark. The first bark since this journey had begun. Nathan dropped flat. A rifle cracked. The bullet struck granite where his head had been an instant earlier. Stone fragments sprayed across his face. They're ahead of us! He crawled backward into thicker cover. The shooters weren't trying to drive him away anymore. They were closing a box. Left ridge. Right ridge. Creek below. Exactly how Nathan himself would have planned an ambush. He looked around. One chance. A steep game trail disappeared through a maze of boulders toward another drainage. Difficult footing. Poor visibility. Perfect for breaking contact. Nathan unclipped a small emergency signal mirror from his pack. He angled it toward the opposite ridge, catching the afternoon sun for only a heartbeat. One bright flash, then another. Immediately, movement appeared across the valley. One gunman shifted toward the reflected light, believing Nathan had exposed himself. Exactly as intended. Let's go. Nathan and Ranger slipped into the rocks while the men searched the wrong hillside. For nearly an hour, they descended through dense timber. The forest swallowed sound. Only the crunch of snow beneath boots and paws remained. Then Ranger froze, every muscle locked. Nathan followed the shepherd's gaze. Ahead, the trail crossed a narrow wooden footbridge spanning a fast-moving mountain creek. The bridge looked solid. Too solid. Nathan circled wide instead of stepping onto it. Kneeling beneath the bank, he found fresh cuts in one support beam, nearly sawed through. One man's weight would have snapped it into the torrent below. They wanted gravity to do their work. Ranger sniffed the damaged wood before looking upstream. Nathan understood. They crossed the creek 50 yards above the bridge where fallen logs formed a natural crossing. Halfway over, disaster struck anyway. One moss-covered log rolled beneath Ranger's injured footing. The old shepherd slipped. For one impossible second, he fought for balance. Then the current took him. "Ranger!" The dog vanished into white water. Nathan didn't hesitate. His backpack hit the bank. The waterproof document pouch remained strapped beneath his jacket. Then he jumped. The icy current slammed into him like concrete. His lungs emptied instantly. Ranger surfaced 10 yards ahead, spinning helplessly between jagged rocks. Nathan fought sideways instead of directly against the flow, remembering another lesson carved into muscle memory. Never fight the river. Work with it. He reached the shepherd just before another rapid. One arm wrapped around Ranger's harness. The other caught a submerged tree limb. Pain exploded through Nathan's shoulder as the current tried to tear them apart. For several terrifying seconds, neither moved. Then, inch by inch, Nathan dragged them toward the rocky bank. They collapsed together onto frozen gravel. Nathan lay on his back, gasping at the gray sky. Beside him, Ranger coughed, shook violently, then struggled to his feet. The injured shepherd staggered once, then walked directly back to Nathan and rested his wet head against his chest. Nathan laughed despite everything. "You old fool." He wrapped both arms around the dog. "I told you we'd get old together." The embrace lasted only a moment. Ranger suddenly lifted his head again. His ears turned toward the trees behind them. Nathan heard it too. Not voices. An engine. Slow. Patient. Following the creek road below, the hunt wasn't over. Nathan and Ranger stayed motionless beneath the shelter of an overhanging cliff while the engine crawled along the old Forest Service road below. It wasn't rushing. Whoever was driving already believed the mountain itself would corner them. Nathan watched through a gap between frost-covered branches. A dark SUV rolled slowly beneath the pines before stopping near the washed-out bridge they had crossed an hour earlier. 3 men climbed out. One pointed toward the broken bridge. Another scanned the creek with binoculars. The third released a drone no larger than a dinner plate. Its electric motors hummed softly before it rose above the trees. Nathan cursed under his breath. Technology had changed. Tracking people hadn't. He rested one hand on Ranger's neck. The old shepherd remained perfectly still despite shivering from the freezing water. His bandaged shoulder had soaked through again. "We're done moving today," Nathan whispered. The dog blinked slowly. For the first time since this journey began, Nathan chose concealment over distance. Nearly 50 yards uphill, tucked beneath weathered granite, he found a shallow prospecting shelter built generations earlier. 3 stone walls still stood. Half the roof had collapsed, but enough remained to block the wind. It would have to do. Nathan gathered dead spruce limbs hidden beneath the snow instead of cutting fresh ones that might leave obvious signs. A tiny fire. No smoke. just enough warmth to dry Ranger's coat. He removed the soaked bandage with careful hands. The cut looked ugly, but clean. Wood splinter, no bullet, no shattered bone. "You've been luckier than I have," Ranger answered by licking Nathan's wrist. Nathan smiled for the first time in days. He wrapped the shoulder again using the last sterile dressing in his kit. "That's all I've got." Outside, snow began falling once more, soft enough to erase tracks before morning. Inside the little stone shelter, the silence felt different. Not lonely. Shared. Nathan reached into his jacket and removed Walter's second journal. Its leather cover had darkened from decades of use. The pages opened naturally near the middle, as though Walter himself had returned there countless times. One folded envelope slipped onto Nathan's lap. Unlike every other document, this one carried no government seal. Only one name. Daniel. Nathan hesitated. The paper had never been sealed. Walter had simply folded it closed. He unfolded it gently. "Son, I don't know if these words will ever find you. Maybe they're only meant to keep me honest. I spent years believing discipline could replace kindness. I thought providing for you was the same as knowing you. I was wrong." Nathan stopped reading. The fire crackled softly. Across from him, Ranger slept with his muzzle resting on his paws. Nathan continued. "After your mother died, every room in the house reminded me of losing her. I buried myself in work because wood never argued back. You did. I mistook grief for disrespect. You mistook silence for rejection. Neither of us knew how to say what mattered." The words blurred for a moment. Nathan lowered the letter. His own father had spoken little after Vietnam. Every conversation had felt like standing outside a locked door. By the time either man wanted to open it, years had disappeared. He looked toward Ranger. "You ever notice how dogs never waste time pretending they aren't glad to see you?" The shepherd's tail thumped once against the stone floor without opening his eyes. Nathan smiled faintly. The letter continued. "When they told me they found you, it wasn't the sheriff I blamed. It wasn't the weather. It wasn't the streets. It was the last thing I ever said before you walked away. I have replayed that sentence every day since. If I cannot save my own son, then maybe I can help someone else's. Maybe that's the closest thing to asking your forgiveness I'll ever earn." Nathan folded the letter carefully. Everything suddenly fit. The hidden room, the journals, the maps, the truck. Walter had never been chasing money. He had been chasing redemption. Every veteran Nathan had read about in the journals, every stranded traveler, every frightened teenager. Walter hadn't been replacing Daniel. He had been honoring him. Nathan reached for another page tucked into the journal. It contained only a single photograph. A young man stood beside an old pickup, laughing at something outside the frame. He looked no older than 20. Strong jaw, work gloves, Walter's eyes. Daniel. On the back, Walter had written only one line. "He always smiled before I remembered to." Nathan stared at the photograph for a long time. Outside, darkness settled over the mountains. The drone's faint buzzing had disappeared hours earlier. The search had moved elsewhere. Nathan leaned back against the cold stone wall. For the first time in nearly a year. He closed his eyes without waiting for the next sound to wake him. No convoy, no rotor blades, no explosion. Only snow brushing against pine needles. When he finally drifted to sleep, it lasted barely 40 minutes. But it was 40 minutes without Afghanistan, without screaming, without reaching for a weapon. He woke because Ranger gently nudged his hand, not from fear, from habit. The old shepherd wanted to check that his partner was still there. Nathan scratched behind the dog's ears. "I'm here." The word surprised him. Perhaps he wasn't only speaking to Ranger. Perhaps somewhere, a lonely old engineer named Walter Hayes had spent 30 years hoping another veteran would someday understand why he kept driving those mountain roads. Nathan looked at the waterproof pouch tucked safely inside his jacket, then at Daniel's photograph resting beside the dying fire. "This ends the way you wanted," he said quietly into the empty shelter. "I'll make sure of it." Far below, hidden by falling snow, headlights appeared once more on the mountain road. Someone had returned, and this time, they brought more vehicles. Nathan counted 4 sets of headlights winding through the trees below. Too organized for local deputies, too quiet for search and rescue. Black Ridge had decided patience was no longer enough. He checked his watch. Just after dawn, the snowfall had thickened, softening every ridge into shades of white and gray. Visibility had dropped to less than 100 yards. For most people, that meant danger. For a Green Beret, it meant concealment. Nathan packed the journals with deliberate care. Walter's letters went into one waterproof pouch. The validation file rested inside another beneath his jacket. If he lost the backpack, the evidence would still stay with him. Ranger stood before the shelter entrance. His injured shoulder trembled whenever he shifted his weight, yet he refused to lie down. Nathan knelt beside him. "You don't have to prove anything." The old shepherd simply leaned against him. Nathan smiled faintly. "You never did." They left the shelter before the vehicles reached the lower trail. Nathan avoided ridgelines, choosing dense timber instead. Every few hundred yards he stopped, listening. Wind, branches, a raven somewhere uphill. Then, voices. Farther apart than before, the search teams were spreading into a grid, professional enough to coordinate, not professional enough to stay silent. Nathan altered course immediately. Walter's maps had shown an abandoned fire lookout nearly 6 miles east. If the structure still stood, it might have a radio or at least enough elevation to establish a signal. The climb became steeper. Snow reached Nathan's knees in shaded places. Ranger never complained. Twice the dog stopped Nathan before he crossed unstable drifts that concealed fallen timber beneath them. A third time, Ranger froze altogether. Nathan crouched beside him. Fresh boot prints. 5 men. Less than 30 minutes old. "They're hurting us." Nathan looked across the valley. Every obvious escape route pointed toward the old logging road, exactly where vehicles waited. He smiled, despite the odds. "They think I'll choose speed." Instead, he led Ranger uphill through exposed granite where footprints barely held. Hours later, the trees finally opened. The abandoned fire lookout still stood, weathered, leaning, but standing. Nathan climbed the narrow stairs carefully. Inside, dust covered everything. Broken windows admitted ribbons of cold wind. A rusted emergency radio sat on a shelf beneath decades of neglect. Dead. No surprise. He searched the room anyway. Old Forest Service records, broken binoculars, then a metal ammunition box. Inside lay a hand-crank emergency transmitter wrapped in waxed cloth. Nathan turned it over, maintained 5 years earlier. Hope. He extended the antenna and began cranking. Static answered first, then another burst. Finally, a signal. Weak, but alive. Nathan unfolded Walter's final note. Special Agent Rebecca Sloan. The handwritten phone number still remained legible. He entered it into the emergency frequency directory attached to the transmitter. Static again. Then a woman's voice broke through. "Federal, Identify. Nathan grabbed the microphone. My name is Nathan Brooks. More static. I have evidence belonging to Walter Hayes. Silence. Then immediately, repeat that. Nathan did. The response came without hesitation. Mr. Brooks, we've been trying to locate Walter's files for almost 2 years. Nathan glanced through the lookout window. Movement below. 2 SUVs had reached the lower clearing. They found me first. Rebecca Sloane's voice sharpened. Listen carefully. Do you still have the validation file? Yes. Do not surrender it. I wasn't planning to. We have an active federal investigation involving Black Ridge Minerals. Walter disappeared before we could secure the last certification package. Nathan looked toward Ranger. The old shepherd stood at the broken doorway, staring into the forest. Every hair along his back had risen. They're here. Mr. Brooks, I've got company. The nearest FBI tactical team is 90 minutes away. Nathan almost laughed. 90 minutes is a long time. He disconnected before revealing more. There wasn't time. Outside, engines shut down. Car doors opened. Voices drifted uphill. Grant Holloway stepped into the clearing below, his expensive overcoat strangely out of place among rifles and snowshoes. He looked directly toward the lookout tower. Nathan understood immediately. They hadn't followed tracks. Someone had spotted the structure from below. Grant cupped his hands around his mouth. Mr. Brooks! His voice echoed across the mountain. This doesn't have to end badly. Nathan remained silent. Grant continued. The papers belong to people who can actually use them. Nathan looked down at Walter's journals, at Daniel's photograph tucked safely inside, at Ranger standing guard despite exhaustion. No, he whispered. They belong to the truth. Grant's smile disappeared. He nodded toward one of his men. Seconds later, flames burst beneath the wooden staircase. Accelerant. The dry timbers ignited almost instantly. Smoke climbed toward the observation room. Nathan realized the tower itself had become the trap. He grabbed the journals, the evidence, his pack, then looked toward Ranger. The only exit below was already burning. Heat climbed the weathered staircase with terrifying speed. Old pine dried by decades of mountain winters ignited like kindling. Thick black smoke curled through the gaps in the floorboards, swallowing the observation room one breath at a time. Nathan dropped to one knee. Think, not react. The panic clawing at the edges of his mind wasn't coming from the fire. It came from somewhere older. The crackle of burning timber became another sound. A disabled Humvee, burning fuel. Someone yelling for a medic over a broken radio. His vision narrowed. For one dangerous heartbeat, Montana disappeared. Ranger barked. One sharp command. Nathan blinked. The lookout tower returned. Smoke. Maps. The journals. The old shepherd stood at the broken window on the far side of the room, staring toward the cliff behind the tower. Nathan crawled over. There. A maintenance ladder. Half-rotted. Bolted to the outside wall decades earlier. It dropped onto a narrow ledge hidden beneath the observation deck. Not safe, but possible. You found it again. Nathan secured Walter's journals inside his backpack, tightened the straps, and clipped the waterproof pouch containing the validation file beneath his jacket. Nothing important could be left behind. He climbed through the broken window first. The ladder groaned beneath his weight. Ranger hesitated only long enough to judge the distance before following. The injured shepherd slipped once. Nathan caught the harness. Easy. Together they reached the narrow ledge just as flames burst through the observation room above them. The tower roared. Below, Grant Holloway looked up. Their eyes met across the smoke. Grant's confidence vanished. "They're outside!" someone shouted. Nathan didn't wait. the ledge wrapped behind a granite outcrop invisible from the clearing below. Walter had chosen this lookout carefully. Even its emergency escape favored the mountain. They descended through loose rock until the tower disappeared behind thick timber. Moments later, the first gunman reached the burning stairs. Too late. Nathan and Ranger moved downhill through dense spruce. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. Nearly an hour later, they reached an abandoned logging road where Nathan finally stopped beside a cluster of boulders. He pulled the emergency transmitter from his pack. The antenna had survived. He cranked the handle. Static. Then, "Mr. Brooks." Rebecca Sloane's voice returned. "I'm here. Stay exactly where you are. I don't think they'll give me that option. You won't be alone much longer." Before Nathan could answer, Ranger's ears lifted. Engines. Different this time. Not one. Several. Heavy. Approaching fast. Nathan instinctively moved into cover until flashing blue lights appeared between the trees. Behind them came black SUVs bearing federal plates. The first vehicle stopped. Men and women wearing FBI tactical jackets spread quickly through the clearing with disciplined precision. "Federal agents!" one voice thundered across the mountain. "Drop your weapons!" Shouting erupted farther down the road. Nathan couldn't see Grant Holloway, but he heard him arguing. Then came the metallic sound of rifle bolts hitting snow. One by one. The mountain fell quiet. Special Agent Rebecca Sloane climbed from the lead vehicle. She approached Nathan slowly, keeping her hands visible. "You must be Nathan Brooks." He nodded. She looked toward Ranger. The old shepherd remained standing despite exhaustion, positioning himself slightly ahead of Nathan, out of habit more than aggression. Rebecca smiled softly. "I've worked with military dogs before." Ranger studied her for a long moment, then stepped aside. Permission granted. Nathan handed her the waterproof pouch, the validation file. She opened it carefully. Her expression changed as she turned each page. "We've spent 2 years trying to prove Black Ridge forged federal records." She looked up. Walter finished the case. He just couldn't deliver it. Rebecca nodded quietly. "No." Her voice softened. "But you did." Within the hour, agents recovered the burned lookout. Others executed search warrants already prepared months earlier. Grant Holloway was escorted down the mountain in handcuffs. His polished boots were stained with ash and mud now. He looked nothing like the confident attorney who had offered $50,000 for a worthless truck. As he passed Nathan, he stopped. "This isn't over." Nathan looked at Walter's journals tucked safely beneath his arm. It was over the day Walter refused to stop writing. Grant had no answer. He was guided into the waiting vehicle. Snow continued falling. By evening, television crews had begun gathering outside Black Ridge Minerals headquarters hundreds of miles away. Federal warrants, financial crimes, fraud, conspiracy, illegal land acquisitions. Decades of corruption unraveled faster than anyone expected once Walter's evidence reached the right hands. Rebecca stood beside Nathan overlooking the valley. "The mining rights are real, I figured. So is the valuation." Nathan remained silent. She continued. "After probate and the terms Walter left behind, the court has already confirmed something unusual." She handed Nathan a folded legal document. "Walter named no individual heir." Nathan looked up. Rebecca smiled. "He transferred everything to the person who completed the work." Nathan unfolded the final page. Walter Hayes' signature rested at the bottom. Beneath it, one handwritten sentence. "To the one who chooses people over profit, finish what I couldn't." Nathan looked at Ranger. The old shepherd had finally stretched out in the snow, asleep for the first time in days. The weight that had followed Nathan since Afghanistan hadn't disappeared. Perhaps it never would. But for the first time in years, it no longer felt like something he had to carry alone. Spring reached the Bitterroot Mountains slowly. The snow didn't disappear overnight. It surrendered one patch at a time. Nathan noticed the change the same way he noticed everything now, not by looking for it, but by watching what returned. Running water beneath the ice, ravens replacing winter silence, fresh grass pushing through frozen ground. Life had never been loud. It was simply persistent. 3 months after the arrests, the rusted box truck stood inside a restored workshop on the edge of Elk Crossing. Its faded white paint had been preserved instead of replaced. Nathan insisted on that. "The scars stay," he told the mechanic helping him rebuild the engine. "They're part of the story." The hidden room remained untouched. Walter's workbench, the cedar walls, the journals, Daniel's photograph. Everything stayed exactly where Walter had left it. Only one thing changed. The false wall no longer stayed closed. Nathan removed the hidden latch altogether. No one seeking warmth should have to discover a secret door. The room greeted them the moment the cargo door rolled open. A warm light, a real bed, fresh blankets, coffee already waiting. Above the doorway, Nathan mounted a small wooden plaque carved from reclaimed pine. Mobile Haven. He never added his own name. It had never been about ownership. It was about continuing the route. The legal process took months. Federal courts confirmed Walter Hayes's mineral rights. The rare earth deposit was every bit as valuable as the surveys had claimed. After taxes, environmental protections, and the conservation agreements Walter himself had drafted decades earlier, Nathan still inherited more money than he had ever imagined. People expected him to buy a ranch, or a mansion, or disappear somewhere warm. Instead, the first check he wrote went to a nonprofit that didn't exist the week before, the Walter Hayes Foundation. Its mission fit onto a single page: emergency housing for homeless veterans, medical care for retired military working dogs, crisis counseling, job training, no waiting lists, no endless paperwork. Just help. The old salvage yard changed too. Evelyn Brody refused Nathan's offer to buy the property. "I've buried enough memories here," she said, "but I'll lease you the corner for $1 a year." So the truck came home. Every Friday afternoon, Nathan parked Mobile Haven beside the old workshop. Coffee simmered inside. Clean socks filled one cabinet. First aid supplies filled another. The cot where Nathan had once slept became available for anyone who needed it more. Ranger always claimed the same place, just inside the open cargo door, watching, waiting. His shoulder healed, though a slight limp remained whenever rain approached. Nathan liked to joke that Ranger predicted weather better than any television forecast. The old shepherd accepted compliments with the quiet dignity of a soldier who had stopped needing medals. One afternoon, a young Marine veteran climbed halfway into the truck before stopping. He looked around nervously. "I can't pay." Nathan poured him coffee. "I didn't ask. I don't want charity." Nathan smiled. "Neither did I." The young man looked at the hidden room, at the stove, at the neatly folded blankets, then at Ranger. The shepherd slowly stood, walked over, and leaned against the stranger's leg, exactly as he had once leaned against Nathan. The Marine's shoulders dropped for the first time since arriving. Nathan recognized the moment immediately. Not trust, not yet. Just enough exhaustion to stop pretending everything was fine. That was how healing usually began. Weeks became months. Months became a year. The truck traveled hundreds of miles across western southern Montana. Remote logging towns, mountain highways, forgotten campgrounds, places where pride often survived longer than hope. Nathan never forced conversations. Walter had taught him that through the journals, Coffee first, questions later. Sometimes never. Word spread quietly. A retired Army medic volunteered twice a month. A local veterinarian donated care for aging service dogs. Evelyn organized food drives every Thanksgiving. Special Agent Rebecca Sloan visited once each spring, bringing updates on the conservation trust Walter had fought to protect. The rare earth mine eventually opened under strict federal oversight. The royalties funded the foundation exactly as Walter's documents had intended. The fortune never became a symbol of wealth. It became fuel. One cold December evening, almost exactly a year after Nathan had bought the truck for $10, heavy snow returned to the Bitterroots. The mountains looked exactly as they had that first night. Nathan switched on the warm lantern hanging inside the cargo bay. Golden light spilled across fresh snow. Ranger lifted his head. A figure stood hesitantly beyond the edge of the light. Young, thin, wearing an oversized backpack, not much older than 20. The stranger looked ready to leave before anyone noticed him. Nathan remembered that feeling. He stepped aside instead of stepping forward. No speeches, no questions, only 4 words. "Come in." The young veteran hesitated. Nathan smiled gently. "It's warm." Ranger's tail brushed softly against the wooden floor. The young man climbed into the truck. The cargo door rolled shut against another Montana winter. Outside, snow continued falling over the mountains. Inside, the lantern burned steadily. Walter Hayes had once written that a truck was only a room searching for people. Nathan had learned something the old engineer never lived long enough to see. A room could keep moving. A legacy could keep growing. But only if someone remembered to leave the light on. And every single night after that, someone did. If Nathan and Ranger's journey meant something to you, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a simple one in the comments if you believe one act of kindness can change a life. Or leave a 0 if you've ever gone through a season where you felt completely alone. I read your comments, and they remind all of us that none of us are walking this road by ourselves. And if stories like this speak to your heart, please subscribe and turn on notifications. There are many more powerful stories of courage, loyalty, hope, and second chances waiting just ahead. Until the next story, take care of yourself, take care of the people beside you, and whenever you can, keep the light on.